Good evening, everybody. Welcome to one
Hare
more
Krishna.
program of the series. We have with us a great guest today. That's Ajita Prabhu, all the way from Australia. Hare Krishna, Ajita. How are you
Hare
doing?
Krishna. Good, thank you.
Welcome. Um, Ajita Prabhu is one of our great members that we always celebrate. And he was born in France, raised in New Caledonia, South Pacific. Ajita Prabhu lived with his wife in the farm near Govardhan, New South Wales, Australia. He's been managing this 1,000-acre farm, and he's been doing that for the last 25 years. Pretty stable, huh? That's something very nice to see. And the community has about 150 part-time and full-time residents, but it can come up to 1,000 people in festival times. And the farm presently protects about 110 cows and bulls and oxen and calves. And they have an incredible school which starts from kindergarten, goes all the way up to grade 12. That's very nice. And also, they have a project called Krishna Village, which receives many guests and volunteers. And he's an active advisor member of the ministry. He's also very passionate about the management of sustainable communities, and he's been very active in our farm conference. So, Ajita Prabhu, welcome, and I'd like to hear from you a little bit about yourself, how you joined, and how you entered this mission of sustainability in farms.
Hare Krishna, thank you, Prabhu. Basically, how I joined it was at the time traveling the world, and I came to Brazil.
Oh, Brazil.
Brazil, yeah. And anyway, somehow or other, I came across the Bhagavad Gita, read the Bhagavad Gita, and I thought that when I go back down to Australia, I would look out for the temples. And then I looked at the back of the Gita, and there were some addresses, and there was the address in Fortaleza, which is where I was by the will of Providence somehow. So I went to visit the temple, and I went to the temple twice. The first time I ate all the Mahaprasadam plate because I just lived in India for a year and was very used to the food. And I could see how the temple president was giving me the plate, but he thought I was only going to have a little bit. But then I ate the whole thing.
Really?
And I think he was a bit taken back. But anyway, I guess that did the job. And on the second night, I had a dream of Prabhupada. I didn't really know who Prabhupada was, but I had a dream of Prabhupada, and he was sitting on his asana, and I was pouring some water on his cup. I was on the right, and he took the cup, and then he raised his finger like this, and he looked at me, and he said, "You should join this movement. It's very good for you." So then I went in, and that was it.
Okay, that was a very nice introduction to Prabhupada.
But after that, of course, I stayed in Brazil for some years, and then I did Sankirtan, and then I went to Portugal and did Sankirtan for some years there, and then I did Sankirtan in Spain. Then I traveled all the way back to India, and then I came back to Australia. And there I am.
Oh, why did you come to Australia? Why did you come back to Australia? Was it your home place?
Yes, I started from here. I started traveling through the southeast. I went through Indonesia and Burma, Thailand, and entered India through Calcutta. And I lived in India for a year.
Oh, I see.
Before I became a devotee. It's interesting actually because I met a person there and I asked him what's Hinduism about, and that person, whom he was just some person there, he said to me, this is the explanation that he gave me. He said, well, it's very simple. He said, Krishna is God and Arjuna is the fighter. And actually, Krishna is driving Arjuna's chariot. But if you remember Krishna at the time of death, then you go to him. And that was his explanation of Hinduism.
Okay.
That's the first time I heard directly about it. I thought, yeah, okay, well, I didn't think much of it at the time, but later on, oops.
And then you started reading Prabhupada's book at that time?
No, not at all. I kept traveling. I went to Egypt and other places, Greece and Europe and etc. And then eventually we ended up in Brazil. I picked up the book of Gandhi, My Life and Experiences with Truth, I think it's called. And when I read this book too, because I was learning Portuguese, Brazilian, so I was reading this book to learn. And in this book, he kept referring to the Bhagavad Gita all the time. So then I started looking out for the Bhagavad Gita. And I was working in some nun's place in Brazil to survive. And there was a born-again Christian that was working with me. And I mentioned the Bhagavad Gita to him. And he said, oh, you know what? He said, I got a friend of mine that bought that book a few days ago in the street. And he thought it was a book about yoga, but it's not. So you can have it. So then he bought the book.
And then you started reading Prabhupada.
Then I read from there. Then I went to the temple. And that's it.
That's wonderful. Yeah, we can see how your trajectory started books and traveling and the mission. But then you ended up doing something quite interesting, which is managing this beautiful farm. So the first question that we are asking is, why, in your opinion, is cow protection and agriculture important to Srila Prabhupada?
Well, I think the number one thing is that Prabhupada wanted us to develop some intelligence. And everything that Prabhupada did actually was, for our welfare. So I don't think Prabhupada had some kind of preferences for cows or veggies. It's not like it was his, trendy thing. But he knew that by us doing that we would have to develop a higher intelligence. And I mean, that the explanation can be broad and big as to why. There's two ways to look at, cow protection and growing your own veggies. There's the way that, it's organic and it's us, and the cows, because, we got to love the cows. Like the meat eater, he loves his cow in the plate as a steak. And some people, they love the cow because you just got to love the cow. They're not too sure as how, or they wouldn't live with it, or they wouldn't maintain it, but they kind of love it. So in order to do those two things properly, we require higher intelligence. I mean, even in the description of the Varnashram, there's obviously people that look after those things have a higher intelligence. And in order to utilize the cow properly and to see that the cow, in many places in the Bhagavatam, Prabhupada says the cow is wealth, isn't it?
Right. We hear that a lot.
Yeah, we hear that a lot. But sometimes in some centers you say, get some more cows, and everybody goes, it costs too much. So from that to, the cow is wealth, you really have to know how to utilize the cow in such a way that it is wealth. And to do that, it requires we need to apply our intelligence. We need to develop and apply intelligence. It's the same for, vegetables, because like I was telling you that 20 years ago, I used to go to the markets, and to buy a box of cauliflower, the 10 cauliflowers used to cost $2. And I was wondering, why does Prabhupada want us to grow vegetables, But of course, with intelligence that I didn't have, we kept trying to grow vegetables, but then now I can understand why Prabhupada is saying that the way the world is going, it's obvious that we need to develop agriculture. So I think one of the most important thing, of course, Krishna loves cows and we must protect them. There's a place, I think, in one conversation, Prabhupada says, doesn't matter if the cow is, if the cow it brings you money or costs you money, but you got to protect it because it pleases Krishna. So of course that aspect is there. But I think for us to develop cow protection, we need to show that actually the cow is valuable, and it also relates to how it relates to regenerative agriculture, because it's an integral part of establishing the balance and nature's growth, and that we see. And I don't know if you want me to go on with this one, or because there is a direct correlation, and the direct correlation is that the more milk you produce, the more cows we have, but then your land is limited, and that's the problem that everyone faces.
Yes. So before we go there,
okay, sure.
I'd just like to explore this point that you raised. So you raise a beautiful point, which actually is saying that Prabhupada's intention is that he wanted to engage higher intelligence by asking his disciples to do cow protection agriculture, because actually it takes that high intelligence. And I think that's what we're leading to when you're talking about regenerative agriculture. So just to kind of have a better glimpse at that, when you say high intelligence, could you define that a bit more?
Yes. There's a lot of people that talk about growing the vegetables and having IMSA milk, but in order to do those things and face the weather, which can be in those days, it can be very brutal, and also face the issues as we have cows, we want to produce milk, but land is limited. So there's obviously a problem here. You need to accommodate all these people, and then you need to have the school and the flowers and the guests and the roads and the festivals, and then you have cows in the midst of all this, and then you have to have agriculture, and it's not compatible. If you go to a farm, they only do cows only, or they just do flowers, or they just do vegetables, or they just have a school, but they don't have the whole lot like that. So right. Then that creates conflicts, because there's fencing, and it looks okay when you drive in, and then you look, everything looks peaceful, but you should see the times where this one jumps the fence and the kids are in the wrong place, etc. So there's a lot of conflicts like that, and in order to resolve all that and to grow cow protection and to still protect those cows, then there is a statement in the first canto, which I think you mentioned last time. It's Prabhupada says we should not draw milk in artificial ways. So sometimes devotees understand this as we should not use milking machine. But my personal understanding is that it's not about milking machine. It's Prabhupada was talking in a broader sense, in a sense that the farmers kill their cows, so their land is always, it's available, but artificial way is that's what it means. When you grow the cows, you don't use the bulls, and you don't use the cows for regenerative purpose for the land. So when you do that, then you have to kill the cow, because it comes to a point where you just don't have enough land. What are you going to do with them? So you're going to kill them. It's not just simply money and whatever, but it's actually it's the land. Land is so expensive. So then it becomes artificial, because artificial means not only you're not using it for the land, but what are you doing with the bulls? You've got nothing to do, so you kill it. So that's the definition of artificial, and therefore, in order to accommodate a certain amount, of course, it's not unlimited, but a certain amount of cows with land and enough proper pasture, you're almost like you're cornered to think and to develop an intelligence to how to utilize those pasture in a way that is sustainable. Then you're forced to think regenerative, and therefore you are forced to think of the planet. It's not like what I'm trying to say here is that sometimes it's a trend, or it's politically correct to say we've got to, the global warming, and therefore we got to stop using plastics, and we got to, stop plowing the land and deforestation, because it's politically correct. But then when you come to the reality, say, well, I got 100 cows and I've only got X amount of land, what I'm going to do with them? So at that point, you can see how Prabhupada's plan for us to develop cow protection agriculture was meant to develop this intelligence to how to utilize and deal with the earth, the planet Earth, in a way that works. Otherwise, it's artificial. So the artificial bit is like, either kill the cow, or there was some centers we just don't have cows because it's too expensive and we don't have enough land. But if we do it properly, if the cow is utilized properly, we'll find that we can feed quite a few cows on the X amount of land, and we must come to regenerative agriculture. So it stops being a trend, or it stops to be a politically correct statement, but it becomes reality. So this is what I meant, but Prabhupada forces us to come to an intelligent platform to be able to deal with that.
And actually, that point that you bring is excellent, because when we think of today's trend, it's more like there is a very much a mechanicist, a mechanical endeavor. Therefore, the tractors, the GMOs, everything must be very mechanically perfect. And the other system would be a living system, which actually requires living organism and a living soil. So what you're trying, from what you're saying, what I could infer, and I'd like to check with you if that's what you're inferring. When you think of the mechanicist artificial way of farming, it's based on something which depletes. If you work the soil again and again, only taking the produce and your nutrients from it, and thinking that you're doing that by putting chemical fertilizers, that's an illusion. Prabhupada pointed out many times. But if you actually are working with a living soil, and that's where the cow becomes part of that ecosystem, then you require this high intelligence. And I think, is that the direction
That's
you're
right.
pointing?
Yes, whichever artificial means it defines the human interaction in a way that attempts to control nature in another way. Mm-hmm. And that ends up in disaster. So the worst disaster, of course, is killing the cow. And this is why it says that, in the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna talks about, the Vaishyas should protect the cows. It's because, and giving charity, it's to stop cutting corners. So the artificial means cut corners. And therefore we lose that contact with regenerative agricultures.
And just to bring up a quote from Srimad Bhagavatam, we hear from 1.19.3, says, progressive human civilization is based on Brahminical culture, God consciousness, and protection of cows. So that's very like a sutra, isn't it?
Yes. There is something to be said about protecting the cows. And whenever you protect something, it's because it's valuable. Like Arjuna talks like that about women. And he says, if the women are not protected, because women are very valuable in the sense that they are the ones that are going to create the progeny that is not Varna Sankara. And just to define the Varna Sankara a little bit more, it's Varna Sankara is of course translated by Prabhupada as not wanted, but it's not. Sometimes we think the parents don't want it, but it's not the parents, it's actually society. So the society don't want people who don't know what they're going to do, whether they're going to be selling shoes or be educators, or whether they're going to, be policemen. They don't know what they're going to do, and they keep changing. So with this constant change, it's very difficult to have a stable society. So similarly, what was the thing you said, the quote?
The quote was that progressive human civilization depends on God consciousness and protection of the cows.
Protection of the cows. So therefore, we need to show that practically how the cow is valuable. And this is done by, the cow is directly related to the Vaishyas. So therefore, we have to show, and the Vaishyas are interested in money. So we have to show how the cow is worth money. That's the challenge.
Right. So when we look at the Vaishyas dealing with the cows in the current trend, we're discussing this paradigm of regenerative, but within that, usually they're cornered by the herd size, and their shortcut is to kill the unwanted animals for that specific commodity. Like if it's milk, they can get rid of the young bulls and whatever bulls. If it's for milk, also they keep only the milking cows, and all the other members are taken away. So they are also not progressive. isn't it?
Well,
Because
when you interfere with artificial means, you're bound to end up in killing. But the cow can be utilized. Well, just to give you a very rough example, you buy land for $50, which is there's plenty of it in Australia, which is desert or just like desert. And by managing the cows properly on this land, you can turn that real estate into $500,000 because the cows will do that if they're managed properly. So here's an example how you can utilize the cow and show that it's actually worth a lot of money. And this can be done. Even this generation can do it. So we have to think like that. We have to think how the cow can be utilized and turn sand into gold. And the real estate is the classic one because there's a lot of land in Australia where it's off the coast and it starts to be desert-like. And when the cows are put there in large numbers and managed properly, grazed, etc., even with the help of mechanization at the beginning, it's fine. We don't have to be fanatics about it. And then this land turns into lush lands, which then can be sold for higher prices.
okay, so that could even be a theme to think about if you're discussing real estate.
You literally need thousands and thousands and tens of thousands of cows to do this.
That regeneration.
This is the way I think would be something that people, non-devotees, would look at the cow in a valuable way.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, that's really interesting because actually now we're shifting a paradigm from just milk to a whole different biological dimension of wealth, which then generates so much produce, right? That's what you're telling us.
The milk is only a byproduct of the cow's wealth. It's a very small byproduct, although very important, but very small. The meat is even much, much smaller, and basically it's wasting. But when you have the cow alive, that turns a desert-like land into a rainforest, which they are totally able to do if well managed, then you turn poverty into wealth, only due to the cow. So then at that point, if we manage to do this, then at that point, people will be worshipping the cow. And this is why we worship. We don't worship the cow just because, whatever, some sentimental, because sometimes why we worship the cow. Well, Krishna likes the cows. Yeah, fair enough. But you can ask, why does he like the cow? Because everything the cow does is good, including producing milk, which produces ghee, which develops brain tissues, which then help you in God consciousness. There's so many aspects, but the cow in itself, if you study how Krishna used to pasture, not just the cow, but his monkeys and his buffaloes and his other animals that he had, he used to take them to the forest.
The sheep, you take also some sheep along.
So because they eat different grasses, they had different heights, they go for different things. And then he used to move to another forest and then move to another forest. And in this way, there's a natural replenishment of and the forest needs that. The forest needs those things. So by studying this type of grazing and looking at the cow and what they can give, we can definitely, convince people that the cow is wealth, is valuable. And I think this is the only way. Otherwise, people will say like that and say, well, milk and meat, and they look at the lower values. But as Brahmanas, which is what we're supposed to be, as Prabhupada created ISKCON to create Brahmanas, instead of criticizing, I'm good friends with a farmer around the corner, and we always discuss things. And one time I went to him and I presented this scenario, and he was so happy. He said, yeah, I like my cows. I don't like to see my cows go to the slaughter. So therefore, you've got someone who's running this farm, but they have no options. So as Brahmanas, instead of criticizing those people, we should present them with positive options. And the problem is that we lack this. We like this aspect of being able to say, okay, why don't you do this with the cow? Because if you present the option, why don't you buy 10,000 acres and put all your cows there and let them die there? This is not really, it's not a valuable option for him. The land here, is you buy one house at the moment, he has $1 million, just one house. What to speak of land to put so many cows? So farmers can't conceive of that. They have to live their lives. They can't conceive of that. They can't conceive of closing shop because it's their livelihood, it's their dharma. So as Brahmanas, as we are supposed to be, we should and must come up with a practical solution for them. And the practical solution would be to actually direct those cows to regenerating land in a managed way. And so many people, you can imagine, cow dung, regenerating land, so many turn, basically useless land into something that is lush and, you know what I'm talking about, regeneration.
Yeah.
So then you increase the price of the real estate and everybody's happy. And, this is the kind of things that we need to present as a positive alternative to the so-called demon farmers instead of fighting them,
I agree. And as soon as they see that, and you've been managing for 25 years, and some of the things are very sustainable. Would you like to share with us what some of those sustainable initiatives you've been doing near Govardhan?
Yeah. There is, well, a long time ago, I kind of thought about self-sufficiency, if that's what you're referring to.
Yes, self-sufficiency, your integration of cows and regenerative, your vegetable production, your volunteers. There's so many. We hear so much of New Govardhan.
Well, the last 3 years, we had the last 3 winters, we had to feed the cows, which we'd never done previously. So then we started looking at the pasture, and we developed this program which is led by Suratanath, one devotee lives here, and this pasture program of grazing the cows in a particular way is really developing good pasture, and we're able to actually maintain more cows and give them better pasture. So we're developing that. We also have developed a program for vegetables. We've got a vegetable processing plant, which helps us use vegetables throughout the year, like frozen.
So when you mention about the pasture, you're saying that you're actually implementing some regenerative pastures and rotational grazing?
Yes, very much. Very rotational. Yeah. So we are putting in more fencing, but it's only very temporary fencing. And when we did it at the beginning, we thought, electric fence, and they're going to jump the fence and whatever. But what we found is that actually at 5 or 6 o'clock in the morning, the cows, they were in one particular area, they started mooing, because they wanted to see Suratanath. So what they like to see a person. So what we realized is that because in the West, there's this kind of thing, you put the cows there and you just leave them there, right? But then we realized that herding them on a daily basis to different pasture, cows love this. So they were at 5, 6 o'clock in the morning, they start mooing away, and they're waiting for Suratanath to come and open and go to the next one. So then when we found that out, then we started reducing then we don't use electricity anymore. We just put just a wire, and they know that we stay here today. And they're happy because they know that the next day it will change. So then we found that the psychology of the cow changed. So instead of, starting jumping fences and doing all sorts of weird and wonderful things, instead of having 5 barbed wire fence because it stopped to try and stop them to jump the fence, we just found that changing them from their little acreage, they move the next day and then move the next day. And just by this change, the cows are very happy. So they eat, they're very happy the whole day. And the next day they know that they're getting fresh pasture. Whereas before, we'd put them on 100 to 150 acres and stay there for 3 or 4 months. Every now and then someone would see them. And oftentimes, unfortunately, it happens a lot for all cows. But this constant move really has changed the psychology. They're very close to the devotees, and they're very much more obedient. So you can actually herd them very nicely. And I could really see how Krishna is really that's his program.
That's a beautiful thing you're sharing, and we actually hear that when you leave a herd, a group of cows and bulls on a pasture, they're rushing to get the best and end up trampling,
Exactly.
and a lot of it gets wasted. So in this way, they understand. No, every day is a fresh party, so let's keep the
They
party
know
for
it's
every day.
shared, so they stop also fighting. It's the psychology of the cows really changed. I must say that.
That's beautiful. That's a beautiful narrative you're saying. And you were going to mention about producing vegetables and different initiatives that you're doing there.
Yeah, we found that. I mean, winter is the best production here. We grow all the brassicas, but we found that when you get 300 or 500 cabbages, can get quite challenging for the cooks, storage, etc. So what we have done now, we've built this vegetable processing plant. And last winter, for example, we cut up all the broccoli, all the cauliflower, and the spinach, and we blanched it, and then put it in Ziploc bags and froze it. So the winter ended in August last year, and now we're still using the vegetables from there. We haven't bought any cauliflower or broccoli or spinach, and we're still using that. So, and this year we'll go on Sunday. We're getting this machine, this freeze dryer. So
Uh-huh.
we're going to start freeze drying certain things, and so we experiment different things, how to preserve the food in a way that is typical to this climate. In Europe, they use different things, like I think in New Raja Mandala, they use the caves.
In New
But
Dam,
here it's,
right? In Hungary.
yes, but here it's very humid, so it's a different story. So, but you can preserve vegetables in different way. But we found that laying out through the year it's much more useful.
Interesting. Yes, that's very interesting. So that even though some things won't grow the year round, you have a system which makes it available. That's
We
really
also find
nice.
one interesting thing is that when we make curd, we make a fair bit of curd with the milk that we have, and we did an experiment to use the whey as a fertilizer,
Wow.
and we used different rows. We had one row just giving them water, and another row give them whey, and we did that on eggplants and a few other things, and we definitely noticed a big difference.
Now that brings to a point in the conversation where we hear that you started some different farming system like syntropic. What was your perspective on that? Did you see advantage in that, or not or so much advantage?
I think Syntropic has a lot of good points in terms of managing forestry and animals, but I think it needs to be adapted according to the place, time, and amount of manpower that you have. So yeah, we did give a lot of courses on Syntropic, and now we are dealing with forest and pasture in a type of Syntropic way,
Hmm.
which means trimming and etc.
Yeah. Could you kind of explain a little more what syntropic would mean? So many listeners won't be familiar with the word syntropic farming.
Right. Syntropic is a mathematical term which means it's opposite but similar. It's a bit like a Achinta Bela Bela Tattoo, actually. So it means normally in normal agriculture you deforest and you plant vegetables, and in syntropic you retain some of the forest and you include vegetables. It's basically utilizing the trees to draw water from the ground to bring it to the surface to avoid this erosion and dryness, and to combine the food and the forest. So this food can be food for the cows and the forest, and it can also be food for humans and the forest. So of course you eliminate a lot of trees, but you keep certain ones, like especially bananas and certain eucalypt, and you have to trim them, because the more you trim them, the more the root system is equal to the branches of the trees. So they requires trimming and management, but overall is a combination of food, be it for animals or humans, with forest. Is
Beautiful.
that correct?
So the trimming really is like you're bringing biomass to the roots, right? And then you're giving all that food for.
So instead of bringing external biomass or external fertilizer, you utilize your own trees to do this.
That's great. So we discussed about rotational grazing and now producing vegetables in way, but you also have different initiatives. Like we hear about your volunteer base, which is well known around the globe. How does that work?
We have something called the Krishna Village, and the Krishna Village is the face of the farm where people come in under different for different reasons, and there are 4 or 5 types of guests. The first one is volunteer. They come and they work 6 days a week. They get free food, free accommodation, and they get to participate in yoga classes. Then we have the karma yoga. They pay and they work half. Then we have the guests who just come and stay here and have a look. And then we have people that come for specific courses that we teach, maybe yoga or Reiki or agriculture. At the moment, we're doing a Bhakti yoga retreat, which basically we teach them exactly what we do in the temple. We teach them how to cook vegetarian food. We teach them how to chant Hare Krishna. We teach them philosophy, and that's a retreat. People pay, like $800 a person plus accommodation, and they come and learn that. I think other temples do that as well. So there are different guests, but all these come through the Krishna Village. In the Krishna Village, then we have what you call undercover agent. They're the departmental heads, and they're also devotees directly they are in the Krishna Village and they're working in the Krishna Village, but they spot and pick out potential bhaktas. So then we have some reading program and explain the Bhagavad Gita, explain philosophy, and ask a question. So they come to that, and we have kirtans every Tuesday night for them also. They come into kirtan, and every now and then, once or twice a week, there's a devotee that gives a talk on various topics. So in there, we start to note those who have interest in Krishna consciousness. So when that happens, they've been taken care of in a special way. And then when they show some greater interest, we have another ashram, which is called the Krishna Pad. So at that point, there is an application form to fill in. When they fill an application, and the application form doesn't necessarily define whether the person is qualified. We have a meeting and we talk, to see whether the person is qualified to move in. Then they move in. So the Krishna Pad is it's a halfway house. So there they'll chant, 4, 6 rounds, whatever, and they'll come to the temple and start being introduced to Krishna consciousness. And then, of course, after that, we have the ashrams, so they can move to the ashram. There's so many examples that I've been through. There's all over Europe people that have come to the Krishna Village and started their spiritual life in that way. There's one particular one. His name is Aiwa. So he came to the Krishna Village, like 2 days out back. And he showed some interest in Krishna, and he went through the same process. And he went to the Krishna Pad, stayed there. Then he moved into the ashram. And then somewhere, due to unforeseen circumstances, he had to return to France. He returned to France. And behold, he's the number 4 book distributor. This marathon, he came number 4 distributing Prabhupada's books.
Wow, that's exciting.
So the idea in the idea in the Krishna Village is to bring them, but to retain or to create a comfort zone for them. Because, in the 60s and 70s and the 80s, if you heard the chime of a bell or cartels, you tasted the pakora, or you read one line in Prabhupada's books, or you saw the devotees, immediately you join. And regardless how mistreated you were thereon, you just hang on for dear life because you knew from previous lives that this is the thing, right? But nowadays you find that people are not quite like that, that the souls are different, and they're more reluctant. They're interested, they're keen, but it requires more soaking, more time. So now if someone came, some people, they come to the Sunday feast for 10 years, but nothing ever happens, the penny doesn't drop. So then sometimes the movement has to float with other means than preaching to the Westerners. So the idea with the Krishna Village is to soak them for a long time in Krishna consciousness. Sometimes they're not really aware of it. But to do that, we have to create a comfort zone for them. And the comfort zone varies according to people. But basically, they're in their environment. They play a bit of volleyball. They play a bit of guitar. They talk to each other. They have the little kitchen down there where they make the little thing, whatever the little toast. So they live a life almost like they would live at home. Of course, following the 4 regulative principles. But they feel welcome the way they are. And I often get that comment. I said, you guys are great because you don't judge us. You don't force us to, into this. But eventually, we can see that their service, their daily service to Krishna has an effect on them. And they go to the temple for breakfast and dinner. So they pass the temple, they go in, they attend kirtans because it's fun. So that long period of contact with Krishna, sometimes it's a month, 2 months, 3 months, 6 months, has an inevitable effect. And I have got, so many examples. People just didn't get it for 2 or 3 or 4 months, and then suddenly the penny drops, and then, their life just changes completely, and they become devotees.
And it's interesting how it spreads. Remember, we were in Scotland, in Finhorn, researching about global eco village, and then we're in this garden randomly, and you start speaking about Krishna village, and what was it? 2 or 3 had been there.
Yeah, three of them knew about it. 2 of them had been there, and one was just in Ukai, the village next door, and he knew about it. And I think there was 5 people in the garden, and 3 of them had some connection with the Krishna village.
That was a great enlightenment moment. We could see how this has
I couldn't believe that. I couldn't believe it because we were north of. What was it? North of. We were in.
We were in the north of Scotland.
North of Scotland. Like the north of Scotland, that's near the North Pole, right? Basically. And we're walking on the street, and I remember I said, let's go into this garden, and then there they are.
Yeah, let's have a look. What's happening there?
Yeah, so it has a lot of it, and people that come here, it's all word of mouth. Coming here is word of mouth, and what people like the most is that they're able to be who they are within another environment. So therefore, it's not artificial for them, if you know what I mean. Sometimes like here used to be, before Krishna village, it used to be like that. Basically, you either stood in front of God, or you were outside barefoot in the wet grass, and there was no really in between. There was no activity, because you were not qualified, and due to your lack of qualification, although we say bhakti is causeless and requires no qualification, but due to the lack of qualification, you're not a brahmana, you can't do artis, you're not suchi, so you're a dirty karmi, and you don't know anything, so therefore you can't really participate. There were, of course, I'm not saying this, there was some participation, but I'm talking here about a daily engagement, an organized engagement. They get up at 6 o'clock, 6:15, there's the meeting, they're told what they're doing there, so they work 6 hours, and they know what they're doing. And it's interesting because the meaning of Agyata Sukriti, sometimes we can, I don't know if we can, but sometimes we define it as, you don't know what you're doing, but suddenly you can't become Krishna conscious. But for my understanding, the definition of Agyata Sukriti in this sense would be more like they know they're doing service for Krishna, they're weeding for Krishna, they're cutting the vegetables for Krishna, they're cleaning for Krishna, they're doing, some of them are managing also, and they know they do it for Krishna. But what they don't know, the Agyata bit, is where it leads to. And eventually they become devotees. And that's the part they don't know. So it's better that they know, people, people are intelligent. They know they're coming to a Hare Krishna farm, right? But what they don't know is through all that service and that association with Krishna, what's going to happen to them. And 99.9% of the persons that come here develop great liking for Krishna. I've got so many emails, Facebook messages where, I was in Amsterdam, and this is from someone that left. So I was in Amsterdam and I saw the Harinam party go down, and I'll run there and join them. Just that, just someone that spent 3 months in Krishna village because totally habituated and totally familiar with the devotees' family. So therefore they do, oh yeah, I went to this temple, and it was like this and was like that. So they relate to the devotees immediately. So you got that from all the way to become devotees. So at least they become familiar with the and to me it's the agyata bit, which means they know they're doing something for Krishna, which is much better, rather than sometimes you don't want to tell them your heart. Well, nowadays devotees preach openly, it's great, but they know they're doing something for Krishna, but they don't know what the result will be. That's the agyata bit.
Wonderful.
And behold, the result is sometimes it's very interesting. Now we don't have time to discuss this, but there's so many history, so many people that have written to us left, right, and center, got married with the devotees, joined this temple over there, did the overseas and whatever, and that's very interesting and encouraging actually. But this comes from the fact that I know I repeat myself here, but just creating this comfort zone where people feel like they're not taking a new identity, they're not changing their culture, they're not changing, they're just doing what they do. Of course, it's an ashram, so you have to respect that. So you have to follow the 4 regs. That's what it is, and they know that. But they like their the way they do things, talk, whatever. But that comfort zone is what allows them to stay here. And the longer they stay here, the more service they do for Krishna, and the more contact they have with Krishna. And this is the good thing about Krishna village. It's that ability to manage them in such a way that they stay and stay and stay and stay.
You see, I'm enjoying this very much. And what I think is we should make one event just on Krishna village. I think that will be very...
And when they go from here, they're done.
Wonderful.
Literally.
Now, we hear many times that farms are not sustainable. So I'd like you to ask about New Govardhan. Is it a sustainable initiative? Do you make profit from New Govardhan? Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Do you think I should say that online?
Yes, of course you should.
if we make profit. Which one do you want to start with?
Well, the one that farms in successful. I'd like to ask your farm. Is it a successful farm? Does it have a loss at the end of the year or has a plus? Just that.
It has a plus.
So how much of a plus? Not in terms of number, but can you give us some perspective on that plus?
It has a big plus. But I must say also that we do not receive any donations from the Indian community, nor from any other community, actually.
Okay, so that's even more exciting.
And to explain that, I probably have to explain what my humble definition of self-sufficiency or sustainability is.
Okay.
Is that what I should do? Well, the first thing, I know this might sound strange to some people because they live in other countries, but Australia has a culture in the banks of giving loans to everyone. In America, it's probably different because if a church takes a loan from a bank, if they can't repay, they're probably all over the newspaper, and the bank will be seen as the baddie, as the bad one. So it's much more difficult. Whereas in Australia, it's very easy to take loans. It was anyway. So if we want to go through a road of self-sufficiency, the first principle should be no loans, or don't borrow, or it means that don't live beyond your means. Mm-hmm. That's the first step for the almighty word self-sufficiency. Mm-hmm. The next one is that we need to develop some businesses. Self-sufficiency is not about we give it all up and we jump in there behind the bullocks. Meanwhile, the wife is screaming out because there's no nappies. You need some games for the kids. You need, to live life. So we need to create businesses. That's the second. I mean, I'll just go through them briefly. Otherwise, it's going to take 2 hours. So, and when I say businesses, I don't mean really congregation, because with congregation, we're further dependent on doing or acting in a way that the congregation wants us to. And that's, you also lose the independent bit here. So creating businesses, you generate, of course, with Krishna's blessings and the devotees' blessings, we get that, but you generate your own funds. Next step, point 2, point 3, is that we need to develop a culture of growing food, because that's not as evident as it seems. Of course, when you get on the social media, everybody's talking about growing food and everybody's talking about it. But in terms of facing the weather, facing the elements, and facing the difficulties that growing food brings about, then people are not convinced that this is too difficult. I'd just rather go to the supermarket. It's so much easier. And they do that, but they buy it organic. The only thing they don't know is that when you buy organic food, 99% of the organic food is grown with blood and bones, which is the main fertilizer. But within the growing food, there are various sections also, which I can explain. Growing food doesn't just mean you throw everything away and then growing food means you got to grow food. So vegetables have to come out. However you do that, it doesn't matter. Then once you grow vegetables and you bring it to the table, then you can refine the means by which you grow food, as long as you've got it on the table. So the third one is to convince people that you got to grow food, because you'll find a lot of people are not, especially when it comes to weeding, it comes to dealing with the weather. A lot of people aren't convinced that even in our society, a lot of people talk about it and they'll agree with you. Yeah, you got to grow food. Yeah, everybody should grow food, but when it comes to it, then okay. So then we've got to convince, we've got to develop a culture. It's a whole culture to grow food. We've got to do that. Third one. The fourth one is to bring back, that number 2, the business. You got to bring that back home, which means you got to make the place, like the Krishna village, for example, in such a way that people will want to come here on your land and spend money here. So that's what, although you can still have the business going outside, but then you don't have your eggs all in one basket, and you bring people here and you develop so that people come here. If they're going to spend the money, they come here and spend it. And the fifth one, this, of course, reduce mechanization. But reducing mechanization, which is generally it's the other way around. When you talk to someone and say, oh yeah, self-sufficiency means you get rid of the tractor, get rid of the electricity. But that's the fifth one. And this reduced mechanization is only because you have developed a sustainable social network, which means you have a system of getting sufficient manpower, for example, for your tractor to go in the fields maybe once or twice a year rather than 12 times a year, because you have sufficient manpower. But that manpower has to be maintained not just with food and accommodation, but socially, because the more manpower you have, the more problems we have. So you've got to have a system that divides. That's Krishna's system. We can throw the big word here, Varnashram, anyway. So you create a system to be able, you apply a system to be able to maintain this growing number of people, which then will help the fifth point to reduce mechanization. This is self-sufficiency is very much linked with social development, obviously, as everyone knows. And one thing that I noticed in some temples, in some communities, that you have this thing, whereas you got a group of people and they're very enthusiastic. There's a small group of people and they do big things and it's great. And then it grows and grows and grows. And then there's a fight. And then it becomes political. And then it implodes. Boom. Then it starts again at a small number and they all say, oh, that's very nice because they're gone now. But again, you start. So then again, you bring the tractor or you get rid of the cows or, because you don't have the manpower. So reduced mechanization is the social aspect of it is directly linked to that. And of course, we're not charismatic people or anything like that. So therefore, we got to have a system which works for everyone. When Prabhupada was here, the very charisma of Prabhupada and his disciples would attract everyone. But now, we're just who we are, and we need those systems in place for people to be able to live together in a way that is compatible and everyone is relatively happy. And by doing that, then we can apply the fifth point, which is, generally seen as the first point when you talk about self-sufficiency. We just get rid of the tractor, get rid of the electricity. Mm-hmm. So these are the 5 points. Yet no loans, businesses outside, culture of growing food, bring back the business from home and then to home, and then finally reduce mechanization. So when you apply those points, then that answers your question.
And that's beautiful because we see that you have two restaurants which are very successful, and they generate over $1 million a year.
Now we have 4 outlets actually. We got a commercial kitchen and 3 restaurants. They generate around $5 to $6 million.
Australian.
The underworld money, yes.
And then you have the Christian Village, which also generates something.
The general village generates a fair bit also, yes.
So we start to see that just by not knowing what's happening in our farms, many devotees have the impression that farms are not successful.
Sorry to interrupt you, but the Govinda's, for example, is the number 2. The business is outside, and we had before COVID we had a catering business as well, and the number 4, bring business back home. That's the Krishna Village, which also is part of the social development and have enough manpower to apply number 5. So they're the practical applications of this. Sorry to interrupt you.
Business going out. Yes, I can see that. And of course, I think this interview is just like the tip of the iceberg. It looks like we need to have a lot more just to give people a taste of what's happening on our farms. Now, you're an advisor member. Yeah, absolutely. Bring the business back home. You are an advisor member of the ministry, right? And how do you think the ministry could have an assistant role? How could it be relevant to the farm communities to expand social development, cow protection, agriculture, self-sufficiency?
Well, should I say something very controversial, or will I get shut down?
You can say whatever you like. You're an advisor member.
I think that in general, the society should invest more resources on education and communities. And when I say that, I mean more than invest in temples and deity worship. And by that, I don't mean that, we don't like deity worship. But if you invest in deity worship and temples, then you define your customer. And when you invest in education and communities, then you also define your customer. So if you can convince the powers to be of the above, which is education and communities, you will find that will be more relevant to the society. Because the society is, I've noticed that you come here and people love the deities when they come here and they look how beautiful they are, etc. But how does that relate to their practical life? Whereas if we spend more resources on education and community living, just explaining people how you cook, they don't know how to cook. Explain to people how you live in community, how you can tolerate someone else, all these kind of things. So if we spend more resources in these activities, and again, please, I'm not saying we should stop deity worship. I'm saying there is a place for everything. But the deity worship is mostly for brahmanas. And we're dealing with, how many brahmanas do we have in a broad society at large that are, Krishna conscious? So the deity worship is meant for that. But if we invest more resources in education and communities, then we will find that we can be very relevant.
So I think the takeaway is that education is the great leadway, because the great segue, because then we can attract a diverse,
very diverse
group, diverse number.
And education doesn't mean you sit them down and you tell them exactly about Krishna. Education means that you teach them a principle of hearing. So to do that, you have to live a life that they want. So when they see that they see that practically you are living a life that they've always wanted, they will listen to you, to whatever you have to say. And this is what's happening.
Right.
Although they may have their own theory, Mayavadism, and whatever promiscuity, whatever they're into, they'll have that's sitting there. But they develop almost an organic, wholesome, natural respect towards the Brahmanas because they manage to live this life that people are really looking for, this kind of community life. So when I say education, I said the basis of education means that they want what you have, so therefore they'll listen to you. Just like when you're on book distribution, people generally don't buy the book. They don't know what's in the book. They don't even believe in God, but they buy the consciousness of the devotee because the devotee is so fired up, he's so on top of it, he's so dependent on Krishna, and Krishna is right there, that this is what they want. So they give you $50 for a small book because they buy that consciousness. Similarly, when we take the principle of book distribution and we apply it to communities, it's exactly the same thing. They want what you've got. They'll pay anything, they'll do anything. The first thing they'll do is listen to you.
Wonderful. So actually,
we need, so therefore, to do that, we need to. This is what I mean by education. Education is to show the life of a devotee as it is.
Yes, you could.
And then, of course, there's other. There's education. Then we go to Bhagavad Gita. We go to
But even if you take
whatever you want to teach.
Even if you take the perspective you just presented, which is that the student is eager, or the person is eager to hear because he sees value. Yes. If you are living a life where you can distinguish between matter and spirit, they want that without even you having.
Sorry to interrupt you, I just remember that I had one lady that came here, and at the time we have some very humble accommodation. It was basically a makeshift container, and that lady wrote articles on corporate retreats where CEOs go and pay $15,000, $20,000 for a weekend. So she came here. At the time, we were eating on the floor with buckets, and you have to wash your plate. Now it's all changed. It's a big, nice copper counter, etc., stainless steel, etc. But she came here. She stayed for 2 days, and this lady was super intelligent, and she writes in magazines. She's Australian, but she lives in Dubai. She was traveling the world, writing this thing and visiting all the corporate retreats. And she wrote an article on us, which I think you read. Did I send that to you? Yes, anyway, she wrote an article after staying 2 days here. And one of the main things in the article is she said, big corporate retreats should take a leaf out of the book of the Hare Krishnas because they walk the talk. And this is one thing that I've always wanted to do here. We will never show or teach people something that we don't live. So however we live and whatever we have realized and whatever level we're at, this is what we share with people. Which seems like a logical thing, right? Everybody will say, oh yeah, right. But the tendency is to put on a show for the people, especially when you deal with retreats. I know the temples don't do that, but when you deal with retreats, oh yeah, let's do that. And then when you look behind the curtains, it's another story. But to just, this is who you are, and you're somewhat Krishna conscious, and people love that. People love that, and this lady picked it up straight away, and she wrote this fantastic article. So when I mean education, I mean that we need to progress on a daily basis, become more and more attached to Krishna, and in this way, just by that, when people see that, see the way we live in harmony, showing tolerance, compassion, they're not being judged or evaluated. They love that. And this is the core of the teaching. And then they will listen to whatever you say. So the point is to be progressive, not just be who you are. And, sometimes it's not that good, but to be progressive as well. And people appreciate that.
And that authentic. Yes, definitely.
Yeah, we got to accept our shortcomings, Oftentimes I talk to guests and they say, well, what about this or him, Yes. I agree with you.
Yeah,
it's definitely there as well. It's the village, that's what it is.
Yes. Prabhu, it's been a pleasure talking to you. We could go on for hours. I'm sure the listeners will also appreciate that. But thank you so much for all your guidance with the ministry and the conferences which we will make in Australia. Hopefully this year we'll be able to. And what I like to say is, from the series of why cow protection agriculture is important to Srila Prabhupada, we can understand how deep the thought process is, and what we learned today was quite amazing about New Govardhan. Well, you stay tuned. We'll have definitely Ajita Prabhu here more with us. And it's been a pleasure, Prabhu. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Hare
Thank you for
Krishna.
the opportunity. Haribol.